Welcome, everybody, to the Big Ten Daily Show on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. We will pick up our regular shows where we'll recap this last weekend, look at the weekend coming up in the Big Ten tomorrow. Make sure you check us out there. Today, we're going to discuss Caitlinclark supposedly breaking Pete Maravich's all-time scoring record in college basketball, which did not happen. It didn't happen because Pete Maravich didn't even own it if you're going to throw everybody in together here. And when I talk about that, what seems to be completely covered up, is the AIWA. The AIWA was the governing board of women's college basketball. They were the governing board until the 1981-1982 season. Now, NCAA snobbery has never recognized any national championships won or records set in the AIAW era. Lucypearl scored over 4,000 points, way more than Maravich and Caitlinclark, but yet she is ignored. Lucypearl scored almost 400 more points than both of them, but it is ignored. I ask why it's ignored because of this. You can't say it was different levels because that was the governing body for Division I women's college basketball. Lucy Harris of Delta State, Nancy Lieberman of Old Dominion, Lynette Woodard, who supposedly held the record that was broken. How could she hold the record that was broken? Because if we're not counting Lucypearl's, how can we count Lynette Woodard's first 3 years at Kansas? I mean, 1981-82 was her senior year. So there's a lot of things here that make no sense to me, and when I look at it, I mean, it upsets me because number one, Pistol Pete Maravich, you know the thing, everybody says it's different because he didn't shoot as many threes or he didn't have a three-point line. There was no shot clock. He played a lot less games there, and all that's true. But let's face this, the basic reason that we are being inundated by Caitlinclark breaking Pete Maravich's all-time scoring record is because of ESPN and their woke liberal crap and they always push a woke narrative. That narrative either divides us by race or it divides us by gender. We watched Cheryl Swoops make a complete fool out of herself about a week and a half ago, and she told nothing but lies about Caitlinclark. Because, little white girl from Iowa breaking that record doesn't work out well for everybody at ESPN. They don't like that. But now they could go ahead and try to make you think that a men's and a women's record are the exact same thing. And they're just not. The women use a smaller ball. The three-point line's a little bit closer. And this is the thing people miss. Pete Maravich played against better competition because he played men. That's not sexist. That doesn't denigrate anything Caitlinclark's done. Caitlinclark is a women's college basketball player. She's one of the top two I've ever seen. It's Caitlinclark, Cheryl Miller. Put them in any order you want. Those are the two best. But Lucypearl should not be ignored. NCAA just going to act like the AIWA never happened. But that was the top form of women's college basketball at that point. So Lucypearl's record should still stand. The NCAA is corrupt as hell. They just ignore what they want to ignore. They push what they want to push. And that's the way it is. Lucypearl scored 4,061 points in 4 seasons from 1975 to 1979 for Francis Marion University. All right. Lynette Woodard scored 3,649 points for Kansas from 1978 to 81. 78, 79, and 80, all of her points were done under the AIWA banner. But we're going to count that because that's a record that could be broke so we can push our bullshit narrative. Because this is the way the world works right now. If you're ESPN, you got to be woke. You got to be on the left-hand side. And if you're not, they're going to fire your ass. DEI is all the big thing. And all we have right now are a bunch of men and women that are not qualified to even be on air. It's absolutely disgusting. And it happens at every level. We do it now with referees. All right. I remember I had a former NFL referee who's in his 90s now. I had him on a show. We started talking about it. He said, DEI is why the NFL officiating is so bad. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, to be an NFL official before in previous years, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, usually had to be a college ref. For 15, 20, 25 years, you probably started out as a high school ref. And you had to earn your job. It just wasn't given to you based on what you look like or what gender you are. And right now, I think that they're trying to make us think there's no difference between men and women, so people will allow trans men to compete in women's sports. It's an absolute joke. If you want to settle the difference between this, I mean, take a really good high school boys basketball team, have them play the Iowa Hawkeyes, and they'll beat the brakes off the Iowa women's team. Have the Iowa women's team play the Iowa's men team. Men team go win by 100 points. I mean, last year, Antoine Davis from Detroit Mercy got within 3 points of Maravich's record. Everybody defended Maravich then, no, because Pete didn't have a 3-point shot. This kid played an extra 2 years because of COVID. He played like 61 games more than Maravich. But now you got a woman that played like 40, 50 more games than Maravich, had a 3-point line, had a shot clock. But that's all right to push her. I mean, I will tell you this. If you Google Caitlinclark and Pete Maravich, you will get hundreds upon hundreds of pages with everything saying she broke his record. People don't understand what Pete Maravich was. College basketball for men was not a huge sport in the late 1960s, early 1970s. In the SEC, Kentucky was a big-time program. There wasn't a lot of other ones. You'd get an occasional program jump up, have a good year. But there's so many false narratives here that it is actually disgusting. And I mean, like I said, I'm not trying to denigrate Caitlinclark, which she's done for women's college basketball to sell out crowds, to TV ratings, the way she plays. She is the most important women's basketball player of all time because there is a chance with her that she can elevate it so people will even watch the WNBA. And let's face it, people would rather watch NASCAR than the WNBA. And this comparison between Maravich and Clark is absolutely absurd. The obvious argument is why Maravich and Clark's scoring numbers aren't comparable. You know, there was no 3-point line, no shot clock, no freshman eligibility. And the thing is this, he scored 741 points in 19 freshman games. They don't count that. And yes, if he would have played, he averaged 44.2 points per game for his career. If he would have played with a 3-point line, he'd have been well into the 50s. And the other thing is this, I've seen a lot of Pistol Pete Maravich game films. I saw him play in the NBA in person. And I can safely say he probably, of his 16.7 made field goals in college, over half of those were 3-pointers. 41% of Clark's are from 3-point. But this is the thing, with no shot clock, there were games for Maravich when opponents slowed their offense to the crawl. In his senior season, they played at Oregon State. Offensively, Oregon State slowed the game down with long periods of passing the ball back and forth to each other. OSU guard Freddie Boyd, who had the ball, he's dribbling the ball, and Pete Maravich actually sat down. He sat on the floor in front of Freddie Boyd, the OSU guard, and he said, "Can you make a layup now so we can play basketball?" Defensively, the Beavers decided to foul Maravich frequently and physically wear him out. Oregon State held Pistol to just 8 field goals. But the thing is, you fouled him, you put him on the free throw line. He hit 30 of 31 free throws. The 30 made free throws still stands as an NCAA single game record. He finished with 46 points, still gets the 86-75 win. Clark hasn't consistently faced gimmick defenses designed to solely stop her. I mean, she hasn't seen a lot of boxing ones. She hasn't seen, too many triangle and 2 schemes or constant double teams or defenders physically trying to knock the snot out of her every possession. Because let's face it, if that was done today at any level, they'd probably stop the game and make everybody apologize to each other. Because you're not supposed to be violent. You're not supposed to play hard or aggressive. We're just out here to shoot the ball. If you watch the NBA All-Star game, you know that. Maravich faced everything, every game, every minute, every possession. And his detractors say that his scoring is because he took 38.1 field goal attempts per game. Byproduct of his dad, Press, being the coach. And yes, that can't be denied. But the other thing that can't be denied is this. The players around him were not good enough to get this done. Pete Maravich had to score. If Pete Maravich didn't score 40 points in a game, his team had no chance. And on the times, and if you look back at old newspaper recording, if Pete Maravich scored 34 points, The headline would be Maravich held to 34. And then they would go on to talk about how he struggled and they didn't know what was wrong in him that game because he was down in that game. He scored 60 points 6 times in his career, over 60 points. All right. Maravich scored 30 or more points in 90% of his varsity games. 4 games in the 60s. I misspoke on the 6. 4 games in the 60s, 24 in the 50s, 29 in the 40s, 17 in the 30s. Clark has scored 30 points or more in 41% of her games. And Clark has a much better team around her. Iowa's good enough to win a national championship, not because they have just Caitlin Clark. They got a lot of other quality players also. So I would say this. Caitlin Clark is the all-time greatest women's college basketball player. But she's not Pete Maravich. Let's face this. We saw this before where we had the women's, World Cup soccer team scrimmage 15 and under boys, and the 15 and under boys dominated, beat them 15-0. I watched on YouTube last night. I watched the 57th ranked woman in the world played a 1,157th ranked man, and the man smoked her. I think it was like 6'4", 6'2". Wasn't even competitive after the first couple games. Now, men and women are equal in everything, but they're not equal in sports. And I don't know why we have to act like it. I don't know why anymore people have to agree with something, a premise that they know is completely and utterly wrong. All right? You have to agree with it. If you don't agree with it, you'll be censored. You'll be fired. You'll be taken off the air because that's the way it is. The world is to a point right now where they try to tell us that there's more than 2 genders, which there's not. We all know that. There's not more than 2 genders. We're told men and women, basketball-wise, there's really no difference. There is. Like I said, a really good high school boys basketball team would smoke the Iowa women's team. That is not to denigrate the Iowa women's team. That is just physical. Men are bigger, they're stronger, they're faster. And let's face it, men have had the opportunity to play basketball for well over 100 years. Women at the NCAA Division I level have only had it since 1981 and 82. They had it before in the 70s with the AIWA, but right now the NCAA will not give Lucy Pearl the credit she deserves for having over 4,000 points. She is the leading scorer in all of college basketball history at any point in any time. It's undisputable. But in the end, she doesn't hold the men's record. She holds the women's record. Caitlin Clark is second behind Lucy Pearl. If she can score another 300 or 400 points over the Big Ten tournament, the NCAA tournament, she will then be the leading scorer in women's college basketball history. Men's college basketball was Pete Maravich. It's been Pete Maravich for 53 years. And my guess is 53 years from now, it'll still be Pete Maravich. And let me ask you this. If a Division III man scored 5,000 points, there wouldn't be all this hoopla about he broke Pete Maravich's record because it's obvious there's a difference between NCAA Division I and NCAA Division III men's basketball. There is also, and this is my entire point here, a huge difference between men's Division I college basketball and women's Division I college basketball. It's just like I've seen people say, well, Pistol Pete averaged 6 rebounds a game and Caitlin averages 7. And she's only 6 feet tall. The issue with that is this. She's rebounding against women. All right. Most male front courts in the early 1970s averaged 6'7", 6'8". Women's front courts average about 6'5" right now. So it's not the same thing. And I don't see why we have to even put their names together in a sentence. One is the all-time men's scoring leader. The other is the NCAA Division I all-time scoring leader. And the sad thing is here, Lucy Pearl scored more than both of them, over 4,000 points in the AIWA, and the NCAA refuses to recognize her. Why would you refuse to recognize a woman who played at the highest level, just like Caitlin Clark does, and scored more points than Caitlin Clark? But we're going to push the Caitlin Clark narrative because it makes the NCAA money. ESPN's going to push this narrative because it makes ESPN money. Every Indiana Fever game is going to be sold out next year if they get her with the first pick of the draft. I will watch. I will watch Caitlin Clark for a little bit in games just to see how she's doing. But I'm not going to go watch two other WNBA teams play. It doesn't interest me. And no, that's not to take a shot at them. It doesn't interest me to watch IndyCar racing or NASCAR. So don't tell me that I'm a misogynist because I don't want to watch women play basketball. I don't want to watch men play NBA basketball anymore. But I'll watch Caitlin Clark. I'm not watching a men's game because the men's game's a joke. Because it's backed by the NBA and you've got Silver, Adam Silver, the worst commissioner in the history of sports. And once again, all we get is the woke liberal bullshit pushed down our throats all the time. What we know to be true is now actually false. There's 73 genders, and Caitlin Clark would probably smoke Pete Maravich in a one-on-one contest in their prime. Give me a break. This is all bullshit. It's getting really old. You can't trust anything mainstream media tells you. And ESPN, Fox News, CBS Sports, every one of these places pushes their narrative on us, and we never get the truth. So I'm going to give you the truth today. Lucy Pearl scored more points than anybody in college basketball history. Pete Maravich is the men's NCAA basketball record holder, and Caitlin Clark is second behind Lucy Pearl, but she's probably the best women's college basketball player I've ever seen. And she is the greatest thing that ever happened to women's college basketball. But we don't need to overinflate this with a bunch of bullshit lies to make everybody believe it. Anybody that watches her knows who she is. If you say Caitlin, and that's the only name you say, everybody knows you're talking about that stud from Iowa. Just like everybody knows if you say Pistol Pete, you're talking about that stud from LSU. Let's give them both what they deserve. But let's not overlook Lucy Pearl, too, because she is the true all-time leading scorer in all of college basketball history. All right, guys, remember, check out BetMGM for all your college basketball betting needs. You click on the link in the description down below. Also, make sure you follow me at Grueling Truth. We will be back Thursday with an Indiana recap. The Big Ten Daily Show will be tomorrow. We'll recap a little bit of what happened over the weekend. We'll preview the game starting tomorrow night and look at where every one of the Big Ten's teams stand in accordance with March Madness, what kind of chance they got to get in. Is Purdue going to be a number one seed, which looks obvious? But we'll be back tomorrow to discuss that. I thank you guys for all watching and listening. But I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been watching and listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.